Before Dillinger became a legend, before Capone reached his peak, America already had its monsters. Bank robbers, escape artists, political fixers, and killers who once dominated headlines then slowly vanished from memory. Tonight, we're looking at 5 forgotten public enemies of the 1920s, men who terrified a nation before history moved on without them. One thing I find interesting about this era is how different these criminals were from the movie versions people usually imagine. Some looked more like businessmen than gangsters. Some became celebrities through newspapers, and some changed the way organized crime worked in America without most people even knowing their names today. A few of these stories honestly feel stranger than fiction once you start digging into them. So with that in mind, let's step back into the 1920s and start with our first outlaw. It started in Europe, long before the getaway cars and shotgun guards of Midwestern America. On April 19, 1890, Herman Lamm was born. He later served in the Prussian army where discipline, timing, and structure shaped the way he thought. That military career ended in disgrace after he was caught cheating at cards and dismissed from his regiment. With his reputation damaged, Lamm left Germany and arrived in the United States shortly before the First World War. America offered opportunity, and for Lamm, it also offered weak points. Bank robbery in the early 20th century often relied on nerve, speed, and luck. Many gangs improvised, some escaped rich, others ended in prison or the morgue. Lamm studied the chaos and saw a system waiting to be built. He entered the criminal world as a hold-up man and quickly separated himself from ordinary thieves. He believed a robbery should be run like a military operation. Every move required preparation. Every obstacle needed a backup plan. Every man needed a role. That thinking would make him one of the most influential bank robbers in American history. In 1917, after a failed robbery, Lamm was arrested and served time in a Utah prison. During that sentence, he refined the method that later became known as the Lamm technique. It changed the way banks were robbed across the country. Before targeting a bank, Lamm would study it for hours, sometimes days. He examined entrances, exits, employee routines, nearby streets, safe locations, and the habits of local police. He created floor plans and took detailed notes. At times, one of his men posed as a journalist to gather inside information without raising suspicion. Once the intelligence work was complete, he assigned strict duties. One man watched the street, one controlled the lobby, one handled the vault, one drove the escape car. Every man had a zone, a task, and a schedule. Rehearsals followed. Lamm sometimes built mock versions of bank interiors so the crew could practice movement and timing. He used stopwatches. Seconds mattered. If the allotted time expired, the crew left, whether the money was in hand or not. His escape planning became legendary. Lamm created detailed route maps he called GITs. Nearby side roads were charted carefully, sometimes measured to 1/10 of a mile. He selected plain-looking cars with strong engines and often hired drivers with racing experience. Charts were taped to dashboards with route instructions, alternate turns, and speed references. He and the driver tested roads under different weather conditions and timed each route to the second. That level of preparation delivered results. From the end of World War I until 1930, Lamm and his crews carried out dozens of successful robberies and stole more than $1 million, an enormous sum for the era. Law enforcement knew his work even when they did not know his name. He moved through America under aliases, slipping in and out of police files. Authorities encountered him as Robert J. Masden, Harry K. Lamm, and Thomas Bell. Arrests came in cities like San Francisco, Superior, Kansas City, St. Joseph, and Benton. Charges ranged from robbery to burglary to suspicion in holdups. He often walked free through lack of proof or incomplete cases. That pattern made him harder to track and more dangerous to underestimate. By 1930, Lamm had built a reputation as the most efficient bank robber of his generation. Then came the job that ended everything. On December 16, 1930, Lamm and his gang robbed the Citizens State Bank in Clinton, Indiana, taking $15,567. The escape collapsed almost immediately. Their driver, W.H. Hunter, saw a local barber approaching with a shotgun and panicked. He whipped the Buick around so hard it blew a tire after jumping a curb. The gang hijacked a second vehicle, then discovered it could barely exceed 35 miles per hour because its owner had installed a governor. They abandoned it and seized a truck, only to find the radiator nearly dry. Then came a fourth vehicle carrying only a gallon of gasoline. The man who planned every variable was now trapped inside a chain of bad ones. The chase ended near Sidell, Illinois. Roughly 200 police officers and armed citizens closed in. A fierce gun battle followed. Hunter was wounded and later died. Lamm, facing capture, shot himself in the head. Another gang member, 71-year-old G.W. Dad Landy, did the same. Walter Dietrich and James Oklahoma Jack Clark survived, were captured, and later sentenced to life in Indiana State Prison. Death ended the man, though not the method. Lamm's technique spread through the underworld long before his final shootout. Crews across America copied his planning style. Among those who studied his system was John Dillinger. After Lamm's death, Dietrich and Clark met Dillinger in Indiana State Prison. They later joined his crew after teaching him the details of the Lamm technique. That is Herman Carl Lamm's place in criminal history. He was more than a robber with a gun. He was an organizer, a tactician, and a man who treated crime like logistics. Modern bank robbery planning owed much to his blueprint, and many later outlaws followed roads he mapped first. It started far from Chicago in the final decades of the Russian Empire. John Zuta, whose surname was also spelled Zuta, was born in February 1888 to a poor peasant family that practiced Orthodox Judaism. The Old World offered few openings, and like many immigrants of that era, he crossed the Atlantic searching for one. Around 1913, he arrived in the United States and settled in Chicago, a city where politics, vice, and organized crime often worked from the same ledger. At first, Zuta lived quietly enough. He worked as a junk dealer on the West Side. Yet Chicago in those years rewarded men who understood hidden money more than honest labor. Zuta moved into prostitution and eventually controlled several brothels on West Madison Street. It was a profitable corner of the city, though profit there always attracted stronger hands. Those stronger hands belonged to established racketeers, Mike the Pike, Heitler, and the Guzik brothers, Harry Guzik and Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik. Zuta was pressured to surrender his operation to them. In Chicago's underworld, ownership often lasted only until someone larger wanted it. What Zuta lost in street power, he gained in another currency, numbers. By the mid-1920s, he entered the orbit of Al Capone. Capone needed gunmen, but he also needed men who could count cash, move funds, pay allies, and keep secrets. Zuta became one of those men. He worked as an accountant and political fixer, the kind of operator who rarely made headlines while shaping what headlines became. In 1927, Zuta reportedly helped channel $50,000 of Capone's money into the re-election campaign of William Hale Thompson. Chicago politics during Prohibition often ran on donations that carried expectations. Votes, protection, access, and silence all had a price. Then came betrayal. During the violent gang war between Capone's Chicago outfit and the North Side gang, Zuta defected to Bugs Moran. Changing sides in that war was among the most dangerous decisions a man could make. Zuta knew Capone's money routes, habits, and political contacts. That knowledge made him useful to Moran and highly dangerous to everyone else. By 1930, Chicago's underworld was colliding with the press. Jake Lingle, a reporter for the Chicago Tribune, had deep connections to gamblers, police, and mob figures. He was widely described as mob-connected and able to trade influence for money. In June 1930, Moran and Zuta were alleged to have ordered Lingle's assassination after he demanded a share of illegal gambling profits on behalf of outfit interests. Lingle was gunned down at a downtown train station in broad daylight, a killing that shocked the city because it struck a newspaperman with underworld precision. Former Egan's Rats gangster Leo Vincent Brothers was later convicted in the case, though debate over the full chain of command has long remained part of Chicago crime history. Police arrested Zuta and questioned him after the murder. He was released the next day. Even freedom came with bullets attached. While Zuta was being escorted by police, gunmen opened fire on the cruiser carrying him. Officers returned fire. 2 bystanders were killed in the chaos before the attackers were driven off. The message was clear. Chicago had become too hot for him. Zuta fled north to Wisconsin and hid near Upper Nemabin Lake, west of Milwaukee, using the alias J.H. Goodman. He chose distance, a false name, and quiet surroundings. None of it saved him. On August 1, 1930, John Zuta was shot to death at a roadhouse in Delafield, Wisconsin. Most accounts identify the killing as revenge by the Chicago outfit for the murder of Jake Lingle and for Zuta's defection to Moran's side. In mob politics, treason often carried delayed payment. He was later buried in a Jewish cemetery in Middlesbrough, Kentucky. Death closed Zuta's chapter, but his records opened many others. Zuta had been known as a meticulous keeper of information. After he was killed, authorities uncovered material from safe deposit boxes connected to him. Those papers exposed a broad network of corruption in Illinois. They reportedly led to the seizure of a large whiskey shipment intended for Moran, revealed advance information about brewery raids, and detailed kickbacks paid by the Northside Gang to state and city officials. Among those named were Chicago Alderman Dorsey Crowe, Board of Education Executive Nate DeLue, Judge Joseph W. Schulman, former Judge Emanuel Eller, Chicago Police Sergeant Martin C. Mulvihill, Evanston Police Chief William O. Freeman, and Illinois Senator Harry W. Starr. All denied wrongdoing. Some claimed the money involved was campaign support rather than bribery. Zuta's surname even entered gangland slang. In the aftermath of the Lingle killing and his own execution, Zuta became shorthand for a revenge murder. In 1931, when a bounty was reportedly placed on Capone, he joked that nobody was going to Zuta him. John Zuta never ruled Chicago, never led an army of gunmen, and rarely stood in the spotlight. He was something many syndicates valued more, a man who knew where the money moved, who was paid, and which doors opened when envelopes arrived. In organized crime, accountants can be as dangerous as killers because they understand the machinery beneath the violence. It began in the crowded immigrant streets of the late 19th century, where ambition and violence often grew side by side. Gerald Chapman was born George Chartres on August 16, 1887, to parents of Irish heritage. Long before newspapers turned him into a national sensation, he was already moving toward a life that would keep prison gates familiar and police files thick. His first arrest came in 1902 when he was 14 years old. That early start became a pattern. Much of his young adulthood was spent behind bars. Prison, for Chapman, became more than punishment. It became a school. While serving time for bank robbery, he was transferred from Sing Sing Correctional Facility to Auburn State Prison. There he met George Dutch Anderson, a Danish-born conman with education, polish, and a sharper understanding of deception than most career criminals possessed. Anderson became mentor and partner. Under his influence, Chapman read constantly, refined his speech, and crafted a new image. He adopted the manners of a gentleman and often used a British accent. Appearance became one of his strongest weapons. When both men were paroled in 1919, America had entered prohibition. Illegal liquor created fortunes overnight, and men willing to break laws found endless opportunity. Chapman and Anderson built bootlegging operations in Toledo, Miami, and New York City. The profits were real, though Chapman was already looking beyond smuggling. By late 1921, joined by former Auburn inmate Charles Lober, they moved into armed robbery. On October 24th, the trio stopped a U.S. mail truck at gunpoint on Leonard Street in New York City. They escaped with $2.4 million in cash, bonds, and jewelry, one of the boldest robberies of the era. For months, police had no names to attach to the crime. Chapman enjoyed the rewards in style, living with his mistress near Gramercy Park, one of Manhattan's fashionable districts. He moved among the wealthy and passed as one of them. That performance earned him names the press loved to print: the Count of Gramercy Park, the Gentleman Bandit, and Gentleman Gerald. The illusion broke on July 3, 1922. Chapman attempted to sell Argentine gold notes stolen in the mail robbery to an undercover postal inspector posing as a stockbroker. United States postal inspectors William Doran, Jim Doyle, and William Cochrane closed in and arrested the gang. Even in custody, Chapman chased spectacle. He briefly slipped away from interrogators at police headquarters before being captured inside the building. Chapman and Anderson were sentenced to 25 years and sent to United States Penitentiary, Atlanta. Prison walls did little to contain him. On March 27, 1923, Chapman escaped after knocking out the facility's power. He was wounded and recaptured days later in eastern Georgia. Within a week, he escaped again, this time from the hospital. Each breakout increased his fame and sharpened his image as a criminal who could not be held. Anderson escaped the Atlanta prison on December 30, 1923. The partners reunited and authorities linked them to a string of robberies and holdups. Across the country, Chapman's name was becoming larger than the crimes themselves. Newspapers labeled him the first public enemy number one. The violence behind the headlines became undeniable on October 12, 1924. During a crime spree in Connecticut, Chapman was interrupted while stealing from a store in New Britain. Officer James Skelly of the New Britain Police Department confronted him. A gunfight followed, and Skelly was killed. An accomplice was caught quickly and identified Chapman, though some authorities initially struggled to believe the notorious outlaw had been operating in their area without detection. Evidence soon confirmed it. The hunt ended on January 18, 1925, in Muncie, Indiana. Acting on information from informant Ben Hance, police moved in and captured Chapman. During the arrest, Chapman fired at an officer and missed. Months later, on August 11, 1925, Hance and his wife were shot to death after their car was forced off a road outside Muncie. Investigators blamed Anderson and another accomplice. Revenge for Chapman's capture was considered the motive. The circle of loyalty and violence around Chapman continued to claim lives, even while he sat in custody. On October 31, 1925, Dutch Anderson died in a shootout in Muskegon, Michigan, killing Detective Charles DeWitt Hammond as both men exchanged fire. Chapman's closest criminal partner was gone, and the old gang was collapsing under pressure. Chapman then faced trial in Hartford, Connecticut, for the murder of Officer Skelly. The courtroom drew crowds. His notoriety had turned legal proceedings into public theater. After a 6-day trial, the jury deliberated for 11 hours and found him guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Newell Jennings sentenced him to hang. Chapman maintained his innocence to the end. In his final appeal, he asked for justice, not mercy. President Calvin Coolidge commuted Chapman's federal robbery sentence to time served, so Connecticut authorities could carry out the state execution. On April 6, 1926, Gerald Chapman was executed by the upright jerker, a hanging method used in Connecticut. He was 38 years old. Chapman left behind the blueprint of a new American outlaw, polished in appearance, ruthless in action, and magnified by newspapers into celebrity. He understood image long before modern criminals did, and he used charm the way others used guns. In the end, the murders, escapes, robberies, and bodies around him told the fuller story. It started in Birdseye, Indiana, on February 6, 1887, where Frank Nash was born into a family that moved often and worked hard. His father, John "Pappy" Nash, operated hotels in several southern towns, including Paragould and Jonesboro, Arkansas, and Hobart, Oklahoma. Nash spent part of his childhood in Arkansas before the family settled in Hobart, a place he later considered home. Nothing in those early years clearly marked him for infamy. He worked in his father's hotels, learned how to read people, and developed the easy manner that later disarmed strangers and investigators alike. Friends and associates often described him as polite, likable, and well-groomed. That appearance earned him the nickname Jelly, short for Jelly Bean. He also served in the U.S. Army from 1904 to 1907. Military service gave many young men structure. For Nash, it became only one chapter in a life that soon moved in another direction. His first known legal trouble came in 1910 with a burglary charge in Comanche County, Oklahoma. Another case followed in 1911 after a failed safe-cracking spree in Gotebo, Oklahoma. Those early crimes connected Nash to a rough circle of thieves and drifters, where grudges could become death sentences. One of those grudges centered on Nolly "Humpy" Wortman. After a burglary case in which Wortman took the fall, bitterness grew between the men. In March 1913, Wortman was lured to a remote area near Hobart and shot in the head. Though badly wounded, he survived long enough to identify Guy Huber and Frank Nash as responsible. Wortman died weeks later. Huber received a life sentence in May 1913. Nash was also sentenced to life imprisonment later that year. It could have ended there, another violent young outlaw buried in prison records. Instead, Nash repeatedly found ways back into the world. On March 28, 1918, his sentence was reduced after he persuaded officials he wanted to join the war effort. He registered for military service and was released in August 1918. Reports later claimed he saw action in France before the First World War ended. Within 2 years, he was back in court. Nash was convicted of burglary using explosives, a common method for opening safes in that era, and sentenced to 25 years at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He became a trustee, gained privileges, and reduced that sentence dramatically. On December 29th, 1922, he walked free again. Freedom led him directly into larger crime. Nash joined the Al Spencer Gang, a crew of bank robbers and train thieves operating across Oklahoma. On August 20th, 1923, the gang robbed the Katy Limited postal train at Okesa, Oklahoma. It was one of the bold train robberies that still captured public imagination in the final years of that era. Afterward, Nash fled to Juarez, Mexico. There, he married a local woman and attempted to distance himself from the robbery. Authorities eventually lured him back across the border and arrested him. On March 1st, 1924, Nash and several Spencer gang members received 25-year federal sentences at United States Penitentiary Leavenworth for mail robbery and assault on a male custodian. Leavenworth held many dangerous men, yet Nash adapted quickly. By 1930, he had become deputy warden's chef and handyman, a trusted prison worker with unusual freedom. On October 19, 1930, he was sent outside the prison on an errand and never came back. That escape elevated him from career criminal to national fugitive. Nash went to Chicago, where he resumed criminal activity and fell in love with a barmaid named Frances Luce. He was linked to organized underworld circles and reportedly helped arrange the escape of 7 prisoners from Fort Leavenworth in December 1931. He then spent time in Hot Springs, Arkansas, a city famous in those years as a sanctuary for gamblers, racketeers, and wanted men seeking protection. In May 1933, Nash married Frances Luce under the surname Moore, while concealing previous marriages. He was still building new identities while the old one remained on wanted posters. On June 15, 1933, federal agents Joe Lackey and Frank Smith learned Nash was in Hot Springs. Because FBI agents at the time lacked authority to carry weapons and make arrests independently, they traveled with Otto Reed, police chief of McAlester, Oklahoma. They located Nash at the Whitefront Cigar Store, a meeting place known to attract criminals passing through town. On June 16th, they arrested him and began transporting him by train toward Kansas City, Missouri. News of the arrest spread quickly through the underworld channels. Plans were apparently made to free him before he could return to prison. At 7:15 a.m. on June 17, 1933, the party arrived at Kansas City Union Station. Nash was placed in a car outside the station. 2 or 3 armed men approached. Gunfire erupted. When it ended, Frank Nash was dead. So were Otto Reed, FBI agent Raymond Caffrey, Kansas City detectives W.J. Red Grooms, and Frank Hermanson. The event became known as the Kansas City Massacre, one of the most consequential shootouts in federal law enforcement history. Authorities pursued Charles Prettyboy Floyd, Adam Ricchetti, and Vernon Miller as suspects. Miller was later found murdered in Detroit. Floyd denied involvement until his death. Ricchetti was convicted and executed in Missouri in 1938. Nash's body was claimed by his sister Alice Long and buried in Linwood Cemetery in Paragould, Arkansas. Reports said many strangers attended the funeral, believed to be gangsters paying respects. His death changed more than his own story. Public outrage after the massacre helped drive new federal legislation in 1934 that allowed FBI agents to carry firearms and make arrests. In that sense, Nash's final ride reshaped American policing. Frank Nash spent years robbing banks, escaping prisons, charming guards, and slipping through cracks others never found. He has been called one of the most successful bank robbers in US history. Whether that title is exact or exaggerated, his record of survival and impact is real. In the end, the outlaw who escaped so many walls died trapped in a car, surrounded by gunfire. It began on January 5th, 1884 in Trenton, Missouri, where Roy G. Gardner entered a country still shaping its frontier legends. He was later raised in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and by most accounts he carried the kind of presence that opened doors before questions were asked. He stood nearly 6 feet tall, had auburn hair, blue eyes, and an easy charm that made people lower their guard. That combination would serve him as often as a revolver. As a young man, Gardner drifted through the American Southwest, learning practical trades as a farrier and miner. He reportedly joined the US Army and deserted in 1906, then crossed into Mexico. Parts of his early life contain conflicting details, but by the years surrounding the Mexican Revolution, he was operating in dangerous territory and moving with men who lived by force. He became involved as a gun runner, smuggling arms and ammunition to forces aligned with Venustiano Carranza. At one point, he was captured by soldiers loyal to Victoriano Huerta and sentenced to die by firing squad. On March 29, 1909, Gardner escaped from a Mexico City jail with 3 other American prisoners after overpowering guards. It was an early sign of the pattern that would define his name. Confinement meant challenge, not surrender. Back in the United States, Gardner turned to prize fighting. He was skilled enough to work as a sparring partner for heavyweight champion James J. Jeffries at training camp in Reno, Nevada, during the summer of 1910. Yet steady work rarely held him for long. He eventually settled in San Francisco, gambled away his boxing earnings, and robbed a jewelry store on Market Street. Arrest followed, along with time in San Quentin State Prison. During a prison riot, Gardner reportedly saved a guard's life and later gained parole. He then worked as an acetylene welder at Mare Island Naval Shipyard, married, had a daughter, and briefly tried legitimate business after launching his own welding company in 1918. That stability did not last. During a business trip to Mexico, Gardner lost his money gambling at the racetracks in Tijuana. Soon after, on April 16, 1920, outside San Diego, he robbed a U.S. mail truck of roughly $80,000 in cash and securities. The crime was clean. The aftermath was not. 3 days later, police arrested him while he was burying the loot. He received a 25-year sentence at McNeil Island Penitentiary. Gardner declared he would never serve it. He treated that promise as business. On June 5, 1920, while being transported by train under guard, he pointed out the window and shouted about a deer. The deputies looked. Gardner grabbed one officer's gun, disarmed the other, handcuffed them together, stole their cash, and leapt from the train. He made his way to Canada. The following year, he slipped back into the United States and began robbing banks and mail trains as a lone operator. On May 19, 1921, he tied up a mail clerk aboard an eastbound train from Sacramento and stole $187,000 from the express car. The next morning, he struck again, threatening another clerk and fleeing with mail at Roseville. By then, newspapers across the West were calling him the Smiling Bandit, the Mail Train Bandit, and the King of the Escape Artists. He was recognized at the Porterhouse Hotel while playing cards in a pool hall. Federal agents moved in and arrested him. Another 25-year sentence followed. Gardner then offered to recover buried loot for Southern Pacific Railroad detectives, hoping to reduce his punishment. Officers found nothing. Gardner coolly announced that he must have forgotten where he buried the money. Authorities increased security. He was shackled heavily, including use of the notorious Oregon boot, and placed aboard another train under armed marshals. Gardner requested the bathroom. An associate had hidden a .32 caliber pistol there earlier. He emerged armed, forced another prisoner to cuff the marshals to their seats, robbed them, and jumped onto another moving train near Castle Rock, Washington. What followed was described as the largest manhunt in Pacific Coast history. A $5,000 reward was posted for him again. Posters warned he was armed and should be captured at all costs. He reached Centralia, Washington, and hid inside the Oxford Hotel by covering his face in bandages, claiming severe burns from an industrial accident. Hotel staff and Officer Louis Sonny grew suspicious. When Sonny saw a firearm in Gardner's room, he confronted him. Gardner fought but was arrested. A doctor removed the bandages and confirmed the identity of the smiling fugitive. He was sent at last to McNeil Island under heavy restraints. 6 weeks later, Gardner engineered another breakout. During a Labor Day prison baseball game on September 5, 1921, he convinced fellow prisoners Lourdes Bogart and Everett Impin that guards had been bribed. As attention followed a fly ball, the three men sprinted for the fence. Gardner cut through wire and ran as tower guards opened fire. He was wounded in the leg but escaped behind cattle and timber. Impin was killed. Bogart was badly wounded and later claimed Gardner had used both men as decoys. Gardner hid in the prison barn, drinking milk from cows, then swam to Fox Island and survived on fruit before disappearing again. The escape deepened his legend and humiliated prison officials. He later committed crimes in Arizona and was finally captured during a train robbery in Phoenix in late 1921. Another 25-year sentence was imposed, this time at United States Penitentiary Leavenworth. Prison transfers followed. In 1925, he was moved to United States Penitentiary Atlanta, then considered one of the toughest federal prisons. He attempted tunneling, cutting bars, and in 1927 led a prison break in which he held guards hostage with revolvers. The attempt failed, earning him 20 months in solitary confinement. Later, he was sent to a mental hospital in Washington, D.C. By 1929, officials described Gardner as the most dangerous inmate in Atlanta prison history. He launched a hunger strike over prison food and threatened suicide. In 1930, he was transferred again, and in 1934, he became one of the early inmates at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. At Alcatraz, Gardner's years overlapped with Al Capone. Stories from inmates claimed Gardner once pushed Capone clear of a lead sash weight thrown by another prisoner, saving him from serious injury. The tale remains part of prison lore. His wife divorced him while he was incarcerated. He worked in the mat shop and discussed escape plans with fellow inmate Ralph Rowe, though Gardner himself gained parole first. In 1938, after clemency was approved, he walked free. In 1939, Gardner published his autobiography, Hellcatraz. He appeared at crime lectures, took part in an early reenactment film titled You Can't Beat the Rap, worked as a film salesman, and served as a guide on boats circling Alcatraz Island. A movie loosely based on his life, I Stole a Million, failed to make an impact. Freedom did not bring peace. On January 10, 1940, in a San Francisco hotel room, Gardner wrote 4 notes. One warned anyone outside not to open the door and to call police. He sealed the room from the inside, created poison gas by dropping cyanide into acid, and inhaled the fumes. Roy Gardner died 5 days after his 56th birthday. He spent decades escaping walls, chains, trains, and armed guards. The one place he never escaped was himself. These men were not heroes, they were criminals, and their stories left real victims behind. But they also show how the public enemy era did not begin with Dillinger or Bonnie and Clyde. It was built earlier by men whose names slowly disappeared from memory. If you want more forgotten crime stories like this, leave a comment with the names I should cover next. Thank you for watching.